Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
President Mogae, it is widely believed that family background does influence leadership aspirations and ambitions. To what extent, in your case, you think your family and childhood background influenced your leadership aspirations?
I'm not aware of that. All I know is, yes, I was the son of a headman, but a very poor one. And I've had to work for most of my life, and so I don't know, having to struggle for your education prepares you for leadership. If that is the case, perhaps yes, but otherwise, no. I don't think my family background had anything to do with my leadership.
Talking about education, you first graduated from Oxford, then you went to Sussex University. You returned home to Botswana. You worked as a civil servant. Yes. Later, you took post in International Monetary Fund and Bank of Botswana. What made you to opt to go into politics, and what were the trade-offs?
Well, when you are a civil servant, especially later in life, when you are a senior civil servant, you are involved with policy issues, and therefore you are involved with political policy issues, even though you are not involved with party politics. But First and foremost, we have agreed that I studied economics at Oxford and development economics at Sussex. So development issues were what was my calling. And as a civil servant, I worked all my life in the financial development sector. At home, I worked in the Ministry of Finance, Development and Planning. And that is why when I took leave of absence from the public service, it was to be executive director in the International Monetary Fund for Anglophone Africa, including Tanzania, incidentally. And also it was on my return from the IMF that I was then appointed governor of the central bank. But thereafter, I would then return to the public service proper. The last 7 years of my career in the public service, I was secretary to the cabinet. Now, if you are secretary to the cabinet, you are involved with policy issues. Therefore, politics, but not national politics, not party politics. And therefore, it was a kind of natural progression to go into politics. Although I must say, my predecessor played a very important role. Yes, I had hoped I would join politics, yes, and be a backbencher, backbench MP, and I had gotten a job with a bank, with a commercial bank. So I thought I would be a banker gentleman. That was my private hope. That was not to be.
President Mogae, in 1998, you became the president of Botswana. At that time, did you have a vision of where the country was heading to and how you could possibly reach there?
Yes, in the sense that I had always been involved with development policy. I was I considered myself a development practitioner. I have mentioned that we had a very consultative system, and that already we had determined that education and training were priorities, primary health care, and public health and primary health care, physical infrastructure development, and so on. So one was overseeing that. But you know, when you become a president, there are those things that you have promised on behalf of your party. There are certain things you yourself, as you say, talk about a vision where we are going. I hope that I had a vision that we would be a prosperous, open society, knowledgeable, compassionate, etc. But I was saying that, but when you do so, there are certain things that come on their own without you having asked for them. And in my case, there is a thing called AIDS. My country became one of those who was seriously affected by HIV and AIDS. And the saving of the lives of my people became a priority. Priority number one, in fact, but something for which I had not planned. And therefore, I became involved in that. That's why I became the first African president to be tested publicly, and also ultimately engaged all the major pharmaceutical companies and everybody who knew something about AIDS, and ended up being the first country in Africa to provide antiretrovirals free.
At that time, Your Excellency, do you think your vision was properly and well understood by your cabinet and public at large?
Yes, generally. I believe in an open society and a tolerant society and an open economy. Also, Botswana has been lucky. There is a way in which we have been more Pan-Africanist than most African countries. During the 70s and 80s, we employed a great many South African refugees, Ugandan refugees, people from Kenya and Tanzania who were not refugees. We employed a lot of people from Ghana and Nigeria. And of course, we had a lot of technical assistance from Britain and the United States, Germany, and so on. So we had a very international integrated public service. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed working with colleagues from other African countries. We had also the opportunity, we had excellent relations with many other African countries. We trained a lot of our people here in Tanzania, in Kenya, and in Uganda. Also in Malawi, sent many also in Ghana. We even had a program with Sweden called Third Country Training. That means that we received scholarships for our students, but the scholarships were attainable in African countries of our choice. So we would choose either here, Tanzania, or Kenya, or Ghana, or Nigeria, or Uganda. And so we had a civil service which was one of the best in Africa, a very small one, but very, very disciplined and effective and open-minded because of the backgrounds that they were young and enthusiastic, and also the people who came to our countries were themselves young, they were from outside Botswana, from other African countries. So I enjoyed that, and I think that's why a lot of people know about us. It's because many fellow Africans have worked in our country, and many of our own students studied and graduated from institutions and universities in other African countries, but also from abroad, the UK, the US, and so on.
Your Excellency, what leadership lessons did you learn in bringing your vision to reality as you assumed the mantle of leadership of Botswana in 1998?
Well, of course, as you say, you have your own vision, the things that you want to do, but it takes a lot of persuasion. First, you have to be clear in your mind, focused on what you want to achieve. But of course, you must be open-minded in persuading other people, especially your ministers, because there are people under you. You have to be open to advice, but focused, and be also willing to stand your position. When you are a leader, you have to be clear in your mind what it is you want to do and how you want to do it. Do a lot of listening, but also do a lot of talking too, because you have to convince people that your point of view is the right one.
Following the victory of Botswana Democratic Party in 2004, you were elected for the second term as a president of Botswana. In your leadership of the 2 terms as a president, were there different style of leadership?
Not in my approach. That was not the different style of leadership, but of course I was much more confident in my second term than I had been in the first, because I also considered the fact that I was re-elected with a comfortable margin as an endorsement of what I had done. I told myself that I have given it my best. You know, you can't do better than your best, but whatever you do, give it your best.
Every leaders sometime experience a time of difficulties or crisis. In your history, was there a particular moment you experienced a crisis?
Oh yes, several times. One time I had had the occasion to authorize the central bank to foreclose against many people, including farmers. Many farmers, and confiscated their tractors because they were defaulting, and they'd repeatedly defaulted on their loans. It wasn't the most popular thing I had done as a politician. Many colleagues felt that I was a liability, I was inconsiderate. In fact, they said I was arrogant. But the fact of the matter is that people borrow, farmers and others. Some farmers borrow from private banks, others borrow from the National Development Bank. Those who borrow from the National Development Bank default, nothing happens. Those who borrow from the private banks, when they default, of course, they are foreclosed against. And as it happens, many of the people who owed included my own colleagues and important and senior members of my party. And that was a challenge. And yet that was the right thing to do. So that was not a very easy time for me. Another time, a lot of people were allocating themselves land, and this included, again, some members of my party and some prominent citizens, but also others who were poor. Now, when you take action against people who are doing something that is inappropriate, the law has to be blind. You have to take tough action against both the important and the less important. And also, years later, people said, yeah, no, at least you were fair, and so on. So those are some of the trying times that I faced, and that in political terms. But as I say, in national terms, there was the AIDS pandemic, which was a challenge for which I hadn't been prepared.
In 2008, you received a Mo Ibrahim Prize of Achievement for African Leadership. What impact did that award have in your career life? And do you think this prize encourage and aspire incumbent African leaders?
Yes, I think it has. Today we are discussing about the role of leadership in bringing societies together. Also, our continent has had the misfortune of lots of coups and military dictatorships. And therefore, leadership is at the core of African development. And I think that therefore this prize, one thing it has done is to draw to everybody's attention the importance of leadership in Africa. I think it's a good thing. The fact that not only the rest of the world, but the rest of Africa, Africans themselves, it has been emphasized to them that the quality of leadership is important, and the performance of leadership, that good governance is important. Current leaders and future leaders would be encouraged by the existence of this prize, together with the index of African governance. I think the two go together.
President Mogae, in your view and experience, what makes a good leader?
Well, as I say, a good leader must have focus, must have a vision, but must have the resilience, the flexibility and resilience to be able to adapt to changing situations, but also be a good listener, consider advice from other people, but be confident in what you want to do. That is very, very important, but always willing to listen and allow for the possibility that you might be wrong, and therefore you must be willing to consider the advice, including criticism. the advice coming to you will not always come in the form of friendly advice. Sometimes it will come, many times, especially from the opposition and from your rivals, it will come as severe criticism. And you have to take it